Chapter 862. The giant steadily advanced forward. Because of his special bloodline, Giant had chosen armored skin and epic strengthening as he advanced into the realm of legends. In theory, according to the natural growth of the HP of the giant species, which was higher than other species, and the HP bonus of the giant semi-purebred warrior, his total HP should be a little higher than Soren's. As a god, Soren's HP was close to that of a giant dragon's. Similarly, the giant's HP and strength were close to that of a giant dragon's. At this moment, the giant was like a city wall, successfully blocking the enemy's attack and keeping everyone outside the ship's anchor. With a good enough meat shield, the battle would be half won. Ugly Monkey and Lulu wandered around the giant, killing the injured shark men from time to time. As for the high priestess, she didn't make a move at all. Only the saint priestess, Miran, would cast some healing and buff spells from time to time. The drow warriors guarded the flanks. They did not join the battle directly, but scattered to block the enemy's retreat. The battle did not last long. These shark men were quickly defeated. A small portion of them abandoned their homes and fled into the sea, while the rest were captured. High Priest. The giant carried a 2-meter-tall shark man like a chicken and threw him in front of the high priest. This is the shaman you wanted. It's still alive. At this point, Giant pointed at the half-dead shark man on the ground and smiled embarrassedly. These shark men were too weak. It had almost squashed one of them to death by accident. As a giant warrior, its strength had increased at an astonishing speed after breaking through the legendary realm. It had already surpassed most of the swamp giants. The high priest gestured to Milan, the saint necromancer beside him, to cast a healing divine spell. Then, a trace of psionic radiance appeared in his eyes, directly controlling the spiritual will of the shark man in front of him. The high priestess was a level 30 psionic warlock. She alone was enough to eliminate these monsters because no one was immune to her mind control. If it wasn't for Soren, her stage would have been in the wider astral plane. The material plane was already too small for her. After a while, the high priest released the control on the shark man and said calmly, "Found it. It's in the underwater canyon ahead." But the shark man said that there are very scary monsters inside. "Get ready. We'll go down in the afternoon to see what's going on, Mordor City, Council Hall." The Mordor Academy was progressing in an orderly manner. When Soren proposed to let the wizards in Mordor City teach the students, they had no choice but to agree. There was only one day of class a week, so it wouldn't affect the wizards' time. As a teacher of Mordor College, they would also contribute. The city of Mordor would give them a corresponding rating according to the excellent students they taught. These contributions and ratings could be used to enter the big library of Mordor City, and the upper level of the library preserved a lot of spells and knowledge from the arcane empire. In a place south of the central square. At this time, a huge new building was being built. This was the expanded library of Mordor City. There were about 30,000 books stored in it, including astronomy, geography, history, literature, arcana, and so on. Most of the books were the private collections of Gloria and the Fallen Witch, and some were things that Soren found outside. Some books in the arcane tower were also transferred to the upper level of the library. In addition, there was an exhibition hall in the big library, where all kinds of cultural relics and antiques were placed. Soren made a relatively tight division in the library's authority. For example, the spell, Mel's Minute Meteor, could not be read in the big library without the corresponding authority and contribution. In order to encourage the wizards here to contribute more to Mordor City, Soren even put Time Stop, Banshee's Howl, Greater Chain of Accidents, and so on, including some supreme magic skills, within the library's authority. It was just that it was more difficult to see them. To deal with wizards, you couldn't just attract them with money. Wizards were relatively rich. Even if their strength was greatly reduced now, many of them were not interested in money at all. The best way to attract wizards was to give them spells and knowledge that they didn't know, so that they would be willing to work. At present, the library of Mordor City saved most of the wizard spells from the first circle to the 9th circle, and it also included several legendary spells, as well as legendary level supreme magic skills. Soren even included the process of making legendary thaling. As long as they reached the contribution point, they could learn it. This was also the reason why the wizards were willing to cooperate with Mordor Academy. Without these benefits in front of them, these wizards would definitely not be willing to contribute. In terms of the accumulation of arcana, Mordor City's foundation was still good. At present, there were 3 legendary wizards in Mordor City, namely Gloria, Fallen Witch, and Alice. Although Mordor City had risen not long ago, in fact, even in the Wizard Alliance, there were only 7 or 8 people who had advanced to become great wizards. There were even fewer legendary wizards in the Northern Witch Council. Except for Eye of the North, most of them were ordinary legendary wizards, and there were only 5 or 6 of them. The number of legendary spellcasters was very small. It was more difficult for them to break through the realm of legends than other professions. Most of the wizards stopped at the high grade, and then were forced to transform into liches or other creatures, relying on time to slowly become legendary spellcasters. For this kind of people, as long as they transformed into liches and did not die after hundreds of years, there would always be a time to advance to the legendary realm. Soren finalized the overall structure of Mordor City. Then, he appointed Saruman as the Dean of Mordor Academy. As a new high-grade wizard, Saruman had divinity, and his strength would not be much worse than an ordinary legendary wizard. And Soren also needed to cultivate his management skills, because if he was promoted to a god in the future, Saruman would need to manage a church. In the blink of an eye, it was afternoon. When Soren finalized the basic structure of Mordor Academy, he was ready to see the progress of Gloria's research. However, at this moment, he suddenly received a message from the High Priest for help. Anti-magic prison. Soren's mind suddenly reacted, and the next moment, he directly opened the portal. Chapter 863. The anti-magic prison was a very dangerous place. Its difficulty was still within the range of the High Priest, but it was far beyond the endurance of the rest of the team. Soren prepared 2 backup plans at the beginning. The first backup plan was that if the enemy was not too strong, then Soren would descend on the St. Cardinal Milan as a god. The second plan was to deal with a very dangerous enemy. If the High Priest personally led the team and still couldn't defeat the enemy, then the High Priest would send a signal for help to Soren himself. Then Soren would use the High Priest as a teleportation guide to directly reach the battlefield. Soren received the signal for the second situation. The enemy was beyond the range of the High Priest, and the rest of the team were even in danger. The whole team was composed of the elite forces of Mordor City. The loss of any one of them was very serious for Soren, so he did not hesitate and directly opened the portal with his divine power. The next moment, Soren's figure appeared in the deep sea. Soren was a little unaccustomed to suddenly coming to the sea, but as a god, his ability to adapt to the environment was very strong. Soon, he was as flexible as he was on land. Next to him was the High Priest who acted as a teleportation guide. At this moment, the rest of the team was quite embarrassed, especially the giant who acted as a meat shield. He even lost an arm. What's the situation? Soren frowned and glanced at the others present, and said in a deep voice, "What kind of monster did you encounter?" He waved his hand. With the appearance of the divine light, Soren directly healed the giant's injury with greater restoration, and then he saw that the broken arm was regenerating at a speed visible to the naked eye. As a high and mighty god, although Soren's strength had been greatly reduced because of the Avatar crisis and there was no way for him to cast resurrection at present, if it was only a physical injury and he was not dead, then he could save them in the blink of an eye. Even if he was cut in half, there would be no problem. The son of Dagon. The High Priest also looked a little tired at this moment, and slowly said, "My lord. There is a real son of Dagon below. It has a very strong spiritual force. All the devil fish in this area are under its control." The real son of Dagon? Soren understood the gist of the situation. He frowned and said, "I'll go down and take a look. Follow me carefully." He had once encountered the son of Dagon. However, that was an existence that belonged to the inferior class, and could not be considered the true son of Dagon. Because the son of Dagon only inherited Dagon's bloodline and physique, he did not use many of the special abilities of the Orbis demons back then. Otherwise, it was almost impossible for them to win that battle, because Dagon was best at chaotic battles and group battles. Since the high priest mentioned that he was the real son of Dagon, then the demons below him must have inherited a lot of power. Dagon had many children. As the most powerful aquatic demon lord, Dagon was an existence that could not be ignored in the ocean domain. His descendants were spread across many oceans in the multiverse, even near the Nether River. However, those places were much more dangerous. Some of the sons of Dagon had even reached the strength of a secondary demon lord, and the one in front of him was probably about the same level. Since the high priest was afraid of it, then it must have the power of a domain. The seawater was shrouded in a violent arcane energy. Soren was sure that the anti-magic prison was below because such strong energy radiation could only be produced in very few places. As Soren continued to go deeper, the devil fish began to appear around him. He did not see the son of Dagon yet, but he sensed a dangerous aura through the gods. The next moment, a row of data appeared in front of Soren's eyes. You have entered the chaos domain. You are affected by the son of Dagon's chaos domain. All your tests of resistance have been affected by -2 negative status. It was indeed the son of Dagon who had a domain. At this time, Soren also saw a huge shadow entrenched in the depths of the underwater canyon. It had discovered Soren. Then, another row of data appeared. You are affected by the son of Dagon's nightmare spell. Test of resistance triggered. Test of resistance passed. You are immune to the spell's effects. You are affected by the son of Dagon's enchanting curse spell. Test of resistance triggered. Test of resistance passed. You are immune to the spell's effects. You are affected by the son of Dagon's enchanting insignia spell. Test of will triggered. Test of resistance passed. You are immune to the spell's effects. A bunch of spell immunity data popped up. Soren could not help but frown. No wonder the high priest and the others could not defeat it. With the strength of the son of Dagon in front of him, perhaps other than the high priest, no one could be completely immune to so many control spells after entering the range of the chaos domain. All the control spells were ineffective. The son of Dagon seemed to have realized that Soren was stronger than any enemy it had ever encountered. Then, it made a strange sound, and a large group of devil fish emerged from the underwater canyon. There were probably hundreds of them, and all of them rushed toward Soren. Go away. Soren looked at the black mass of devil fish. In an instant, a golden light appeared in his eyes, and then he roared towards the front. Intimidation. Divine power conversion. Soren's roar formed a wave on the bottom of the sea, and then all the devil fish that rushed towards him trembled. Then, as if they had seen something extremely terrifying, they directly fled in all directions. Intimidation was successful. Soren's basic skill intimidation was as high as 575 points, which meant that he could directly rely on his own aura to disperse all the creatures below legendary. If one were to use data to describe it, it would be that the large group of devil fish in front of him directly turned from red to yellow because of Soren's intimidation. All the deep-sea monsters controlled by the son of Dagon were directly stunned by Soren's roar. The idea of relying on numbers to deplete Soren's strength failed, and the son of Dagon launched an attack on him in the next moment. Suddenly, huge tentacles emerged from the depths of the underwater canyon and entangled Soren from all directions. Strangle. Facing the ferocious tentacles, Soren rushed over with no expression. With a strange silver-white stream of light, all the tentacles were directly cut off wherever his figure went. Now, he was no longer as strong as he was in the past. As a intermediate divine power, God, and with a divine artifact in hand, even against an enemy like the son of Dagon, Soren could completely crush it. Chapter 864. The thick smell of blood permeated the seawater. Facing Soren, who was closing in, the son of Dagon was obviously panicking. As the descendant of the demon Orbis, the son of Dagon's most powerful weapon was its own body. Now that its body was powerless in front of Soren's divine artifact, the son of Dagon could only place its hopes on its innate ability as the demon Orbis. Along with a sharp roar, a strong spiritual attack was launched at Soren. Soren frowned slightly and waved his hand. Immediately, a divine barrier appeared in front of him. The seawater began to ripple violently. The spiritual attack of the son of Dagon could not shake Soren's divine barrier at all. In the next moment, Soren's figure flew out. A silver-white stream of light cut through the silent seabed. Soren directly attacked the son of Dagon from the front. Relying on his powerful divine artifact, he directly broke through all the tentacles. Then, he waved his sharp blade and pierced into the son of Dagon's head. A row of data appeared in front of him. Son of Dagon, killed. Extracting target's soul energy. You've received 3650000 slaughter EXP. Target has divine power. Extracting target's divine power. You've received 8 divine power. Little by little, the light of divine power merged into Soren's body. The son of Dagon had a lot of divine power. Although such an existence was powerful, it did not have a single divinity. What Soren needed the most at the moment was not divine power, but divinity to further stabilize his strength. Compared to the divine power that was becoming more and more common, divinity could only be obtained from special enemies. Now that Soren's divine power was as high as 230 points, it was more than twice the amount of divinity. For Soren, leveling up to greater divinity was not a problem. However, gathering enough divinity to level up to greater divinity was very difficult. He had to continue killing gods. And it had to be a god with intermediate divine power or above. Otherwise, he could only rely on large numbers to make up for it. Plop. Huge tentacles with a diameter of more than 3 meters fell to the bottom of the sea. Filthy demon blood seeped out from the body of the son of Dagon. The blood had a trace of fierce corrosiveness, and the nearby seabed plants withered. Dispel. Purify. A golden light of divinity appeared in Soren's palm, and the evil power that was polluting the seawater was purified by him. The son of Dagon occupied the entrance to the anti-magic prison. With its huge body, it was difficult to enter, so it occupied the place with the strongest radiation. Soren frowned as he stared at the huge corpse in front of him. He then cast a spell and forcefully moved the corpse away. A deep entrance appeared in front of him. This should be one of the important strongholds of the anti-magic prison. This was because Soren could feel a very strong energy radiation. It was probably as strong as when he found the elemental furnace last time. My lord. The figure of the high priestess also appeared behind Soren. Her eyes were full of awe at the moment because the son of Dagon, who blocked them outside, was so easily killed by Soren. Soren looked back at her, then glanced at the other members of the team and said, "You arrange for others to cut up the body of the son of Dagon and bring it up. Gloria and Karina's experimental research should be useful. High Priestess. Milan. Giant. The 3 of you come with me into the anti-magic prison." The son of Dagon weighed more than hundreds of tons, and it was not easy to transport it up. Soren only took 4 people into the anti-magic prison because they were the only ones whose strength could be stable above the legendary level. They did not know what kind of monsters were inside the anti-magic prison. People who were not at the legendary level would die if they went in. Yes. The high priestess quickly followed the order and arranged for people to cut up and transport the body of the son of Dagon. The strength of the son of Dagon, who was killed by Soren, was equivalent to the strength of a lesser demon lord. It was similar to his demon incarnation, Sauron. There were many rare treasures on it. Light. A little bit of light appeared in Soren's palm. As the group entered the anti-magic prison, everything in front of them became clear. As an underground ruin sunk to the bottom of the sea, the interior of the anti-magic prison was very damaged. Soren could see many dilapidated buildings, most of which had collapsed. They had only moved forward a few hundred meters when they were blocked by a collapsed wall in front of them. Stone to mud. Soren waved his hand and cast a spell. Then he reached out and touched the wall gently. The wall in front of him turned into mud and scattered. A huge lavender crystal appeared in front of them. Soren had seen such a crystal in the ruins of the Battle of the Golems. He knew that he had entered the interior of the anti-magic prison. Rooms began to appear in front of them. There were many glass crystals. More than 90% of them were damaged. There were also incomplete bookshelves. The books in them were basically gone. Seawater covered the entire anti-magic prison. There was almost nothing intact. Huh? Soren walked around several rooms. Suddenly, he seemed to feel something and walked toward one of the halls. A huge metal construct appeared in front of him. Elemental furnace? No. Soren glanced at it and was quite surprised. He murmured, "It's not like an elemental furnace. The energy radiation is all emitted from it. This is not an elemental furnace. It looks like a device for elemental fission." Soren's research on alchemy was not enough. He had to find a way to transport this thing back to Mordor and give it to Gloria to study. Alert! Alert! Intruder found. Activate Arcane Guardian. Destroy the intruder. There was a sharp metal sound, and then one of the doors opened. Soren almost instantly entered battle mode. He waited for a while, but still did not see the figure of Arcane Guardian. Soren thought for a while and carefully approached the door. Then, he saw a puppet golem that had been buried underground for a long time. There was a red arcane glow on its body, but most of its body had been broken. This was the bottom of the sea and not on land. There were very few things in the entire anti-magic prison that could function normally. Where is the magic lock? Soren walked around the ruins and frowned. Under normal circumstances, a place like the anti-magic prison must have a magic lock. So where is the core of the magic lock? Is it because it's not activated? Soren walked through the rooms one by one and saw many strange devices, but most of them had failed. On the way, he also encountered a few guardian golems that could still function, but they were easily taken care of by him. After confirming that there were no dangerous enemies in the entire underground ruins, Soren prepared to return to the pirate island. A teleportation circle would soon be built here, and then the manpower and material resources of Mordor City would be invested in it. Most of the devices in the anti-magic prison would be transported back to Mordor City. Perhaps only Fallen Witch and Gloria could distinguish which ones were related to the magic lock. Chapter 865. The preliminary cleaning of the anti-magic prison was completed. Soren brought a small part of the intact alchemy runes to the land. He did not rush back to Mordor City, but waited for Gloria's arrival. Gloria arrived by teleportation around dusk. Fallen Witch was half an hour later than her, and Roland did not know why she was delayed, but her expression seemed a bit strange today. Unlike Soren, who looked at the pile of alchemy runes, Gloria and Fallen Witch couldn't help but be surprised when they saw these things. They carefully took it apart and studied it. At the same time, they instructed the apprentices beside them to constantly record something. In their eyes, this pile of severely damaged equipment was like an incredible treasure. Even some of the fine rune engravings on it were carefully copied down. Okay. Soren had to admit that he was not a pure scholar, and he could not understand the runes on these alchemy runes at all. As if knowing Soren's doubts, Gloria took time to look at him, gently lifted her long hair and said, "According to the degree of damage of these alchemy devices, we can basically be sure that the magic lock has been closed. The energy supply devices are all damaged. The magic lock only relies on self-replenishing energy to maintain operation for at most 100 years, and this place has been buried for thousands of years. The core of the magic lock should be silent somewhere on the bottom of the sea. Next, we need a lot of manpower to salvage it. According to the preliminary judgment, there will be a complete magic lock below, and it will be very large, larger than the magic lock of the Arcane Tower. The range of the magic lock is estimated to cover half of the island of Mordor. The anti-magic prison was an island. The magic lock here was naturally larger than that of an ordinary arcane tower. Gloria judged the range of the magic lock according to the number of alchemy devices, and the next salvage would be in this range. Fallen, which next to her was not interested in the magic lock. She was studying devices similar to elemental fission. It's a bit different from elemental furnace. Fallen, which looked at the crystal rune in front of her and murmured, but the energy supply must be larger. This thing needs to be repaired before we can confirm whether it's an elemental fission device. The anti-magic prison required a large amount of energy. This was a very special place where many evil arcanists had been imprisoned. In order to maintain the seal on them, the magic lock had to be operated at full power. Therefore, the energy supply device must be very advanced, probably as much as the energy consumption of a floating city. Since all of you are here, then I'll leave this side to you. I'll go back and send more people over. Soren was bored after watching for a while. He could learn spells, but calmly studying such a complicated alchemy rune wasn't his style. Fortunately, Gloria and Fallen, which were experts in this field. Now that they had arrived in Soren, there was no need for Mordor to stay here. Gloria, who had been immersed in researching new things, had no objections to this. What she wanted to do the most right now was to move everything from the anti-magic prison up. As soon as he returned to Mordor City, Soren seemed to have noticed something. The next moment, his figure appeared directly in Vivian's room. During this time, Vivian had been integrating the power of divinity given by Soren. It was very difficult for a native to become a demigod. It was not something that could be achieved in a short period of time. Soren's speed of integrating divinity and divinity was like cheating, even for a god. At this moment, a trace of pain appeared on Vivian's delicate little face. Her whole body was suspended in midair, and the dissipating power of fear formed a barrier, isolating the surrounding space. Vivian's body was changing. From the bloodline of the deity to the bloodline of the demigod. But just as she was about to succeed, a little accident happened. The will of the Dread Lord came. At this time, in Soren's eyes, Vivian's figure was suspended in midair, and behind her was a ferocious shadow of the Dread Lord. This shadow could not be seen by the naked eye, but for Soren, who was in the form of a god, he could perceive any trace of spiritual will and special existence on the soul. The Dread Lord finally couldn't hold it in anymore. Just when Vivian was about to integrate the power of divinity and become a demigod, he launched an attack on Vivian, trying to invade her mind and seize control of her body. This was a seed that was engraved on the soul. It had been left as early as the moment Vivian was born. Even Soren had no way to erase it. If the Dread Lord succeeded, then Vivian would disappear completely, and the Dread Lord would be reborn in her body. Not only could he take back his divinity and divine power, but he could also absorb Vivian's power. Finally, can't take it anymore? A cold, murderous intent appeared in Soren's eyes. Without hesitation, he reached out his finger and gently touched Vivian's forehead. The Dread Lord was dead. His remaining divine power was not enough for a direct resurrection, so he could only attack Vivian at the most critical moment, trying to destroy Vivian's spiritual will in one fell swoop. This mark was left on her mind and soul. Soren instantly realized the Dread Lord's plot. The next moment, he activated his divine form and directly entered the spiritual space where Vivian's soul was trapped. Time froze at this moment. Vivian's painful expression seemed to have disappeared, and a surprised smile appeared on her delicate little face. At this time, a ray of light appeared on Soren's body. A little bit of divine light merged into Vivian's body and turned into an invisible shadow that directly entered Vivian's body. Soren directly invaded the world where the Dread Lord was trying to trap Vivian in his spiritual form. The wind was howling. The whole world was gray, and a gloomy atmosphere shrouded everything, inexplicably making people feel a sense of panic. In the center of the whole world was a huge throne. Countless demons gathered around the throne, but none of them dared to approach it. Big brother. Big brother. At this time, a ray of golden light suddenly appeared in the sky, and then a shadow shrouded in divine light directly fell on the throne. The shadow gradually turned into a solid body, and Soren's figure appeared in the center of the throne. At this moment, he looked as if he was facing a great enemy, but the next moment, he was stunned. This was because he saw two identical Vivians on this throne that was constructed purely out of divine power. What the hell? What's going on? Why are there two identical Vivian in the spiritual world? At this moment, Soren suddenly became a little confused. Because in the eyes of the gods, the two Vivian's souls were the same. Chapter 866. The sky was gray. This world seemed to be shrouded by some kind of power. Even Soren felt a sense of oppression and fear after he arrived. However, this feeling only existed for a short while. Soon, Soren's firm will had resisted all the negative effects. He glanced around and saw countless demons and petitioners. Then, he roughly guessed where he was. This should be the place where the soul of the Dread Lord was kept. It was also the throne of fear, in the kingdom of fear in the bottomless abyss. All of this happened in an instant. Although Soren was surprised by the two Vivians' appearance, his long-term adventure still made him habitually understand the surrounding environment. Vivian was a smart girl. If it weren't for the limitations of being a native, her talent would probably be higher than Soren's. This was not only because she was better in a certain aspect, but also because she had an advantage in all aspects, including IQ. Even Soren had to admit this because when he was Vivian's age, his performance was far inferior to hers. The little girl was barely 11 years old this year. Soren's expression did not escape the little girl's eyes. Then, the two girls in front of him looked at each other. Vivian, who was standing on the left, bowed slightly to Soren. She twirled her skirt and bowed slightly. Then, she said softly, "Brother." "Hello. I'm Lillian." Lillian? The Witch of Fear, Lillian? She had existed for a long time? This sentence shocked Soren like thunder. But then, he seemed to have understood something. He immediately looked at Vivian and frowned. "Vivian. What's going on? Has Lillian already awakened in your body?" "Yes. When we were in Gloria's Tower, you called yourself Lillian. So, you've been hiding it from me all this time?" Soren already had a vague guess in his heart. However, Vivian's usual behavior was normal, so he was only slightly suspicious. Today, he actually saw two Vivians. His suspicions in the past immediately had a basis, and he quickly understood the general situation of the matter. "Brother. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hide it. But. Vivian, who was standing on the right, had a guilty look on her face. She opened her mouth a few times, but she didn't know what to say. She wanted to tell Soren the truth several times, but she didn't know what to say. "Forget it." Seeing the little girl's conflicted look, Soren's heart softened. He shook his head and said, "Now is not the time to talk about this. The will of the Dread Lord is still watching us. The most important thing now is to get you out of here." Having said that, Soren turned around and looked at Lillian beside him. He was a little unaccustomed to the fact that they looked exactly the same, but he quickly recovered and asked calmly, "When did you start to have self-awareness?" "Self-awareness?" Hearing Soren's words, Lillian, who was standing on the left, was startled. She then whispered, "Brother. I started to have self-awareness when Vivian was born. It's just that the memory at that time was very vague. I only started to understand when Vivian was 3 years old. But when I really woke up, it was after the appearance of the other children of fear." The little girl was very smart. Lillian obviously guessed what Soren wanted to ask. Two souls in one body. Soren immediately understood the key, and also why Lillian called him brother. That was the reason. Lillian was not born out of thin air. Her soul already existed when Vivian was born, but at that time, Vivian's soul was the dominant one, and she fell into a deep sleep. It was even possible that her soul was still controlled by the will of the Dread Lord. According to the normal process, after the outbreak of the Avatar crisis, Vivian's soul would disappear due to some accident, and Lillian's soul would replace Vivian's body. At the same time, the will of the Dread Lord would descend on her body. At this time, the conditions for the resurrection of the Dread Lord were about to be met. All the accidents happened because of Soren. First, he delayed the time of Lillian's awakening, then killed some children of fear, and finally even the vampiric children. These divine powers with the will of the Dread Lord were absorbed and transformed by Soren, and the will of the Dread Lord was naturally killed by him. Note, the details are in the part where Soren walked barefoot for thousands of miles to temper himself by killing the will of the Dread Lord. If these children of fear died in the hands of Vivian, then Lillian would be controlled by the Dread Lord. The will of the Dread Lord gathered little by little, and its influence became greater and greater. Finally, Lillian would become a crazy witch of fear. Soren's appearance changed everything. The will of the Dread Lord was eliminated by Soren, and Lillian grew in another way, and retained most of her original memories. And these memories were everything that Vivian had experienced. In other words, the will of the Dread Lord was still unable to control her, which directly led to the emergence of another rebellious version of Vivian. As the Witch of Fear, she was naturally different from Vivian, but her experience was equivalent to another hidden sister of Soren. This was also why she called Soren brother. According to the original nature of the Witch of Fear, he was afraid that she would be very crazy and chaotic. In the past, the Witch of Fear loved to bring destruction and fear, and it was very common for her to massacre cities. Otherwise, in the end, the Silver Moon Lady wouldn't have killed her. But the Lillian in front of him was very quiet, and she didn't look like she was dominated by madness and chaos at all. Now, their forms were made up of souls and spirits, and they were the closest to the essence, representing their truest selves. There might be a small problem. However, Soren quickly accepted Lillian's existence because although she was different from Vivian, some things were very similar. Even the way she called him brother was exactly the same. She experienced everything from the perspective of a bystander to Vivian, and, one body two souls, referred to this situation. Come here. Soren didn't have time to think about these things. The most important thing now was to take Vivian and leave this place. The longer they delayed, the higher the chances of the Dread Lord winning. He had to find a way to leave this spiritual space. The Dread Lord is secretly watching us. Soren looked at the countless demons and petitioners around him. These were all illusions of the spiritual world, and they didn't directly reach the throne of fear, so the Dread Lord's power wasn't at its strongest yet. Soren thought of this and said seriously, "Hold on to me tightly later. I will try to use my divine power to break open the space and bring you back to the real world. No matter what happens when you break open the space, don't let go. You must remember this. Otherwise, the Dread Lord will most likely trap you in this spiritual world formed by the throne of fear." The two girls heard this and nodded seriously. Then, they hugged Soren's arms from both sides. They had been trapped here for quite some time. As mortals, they knew nothing about the power of gods, and they didn't know how to leave this space. The Dread Lord wanted to use this to wear down their will and make them gradually fall into madness and chaos due to the oppressive and terrifying environment. At that time, there would be a loophole in their will, and the Dread Lord would take advantage of it to control them. Although this was a spiritual world, it perfectly replicated everything in the kingdom of fear. In other words, this place was shrouded in the power of the fear domain. Soren couldn't stay here for too long, and he had to bring the two girls out. "Are you ready?" Soren looked around with a serious expression and said in a deep voice, "When we break open the space later, the Dread Lords will definitely stop us. You have to be careful. P.S. There's only one update for today. This part of the plot requires a lot of thinking before it can be written. A public WeChat account posted a lowly picture that looks like Vivian today. You can go and see if it looks like her." Chapter 867. Changing Reality, Divinity Ability. With the entry of Soren, the whole spiritual space became more and more oppressive. This meant that the will of the Dread Lord had begun to act. Soren's entry made him feel uneasy and was secretly preparing to launch an attack. This was a spiritual space, a collision of will and strength. The Dread Lord, as an old great divine power, naturally had his own trump cards. But at the same time, Sauron, as a new god, also had great perseverance from a mortal to the present. The confrontation between the two sides made it so that neither side was sure to win. At most, it was a tie. The golden light of divinity appeared. Sauron's whole body seemed to be covered by a golden light. The light of divinity covered Vivian and Lillian, and then a trace of visible black aura was expelled from their bodies. This was the power of the Dread Lord after he trapped them in the spiritual space. It was also a kind of negative emotion that contained fear. The arrival of Sauron dispelled this evil power and made the two girls feel more at ease than ever. At the same time, in Vivian's room in the real world, Sauron's body was also covered by a golden light. At the same time, the great temple of Moder City suddenly shone brightly, and a hazy shadow appeared above the statue of the central temple. The archbishop in charge of maintaining the temple immediately noticed the abnormality and noticed that Sauron was extracting the power of faith from the temple. So, he immediately began to organize all the priests and believers in the temple to pray and feed the power of the temple back to Sauron. Sauron did not dare to be careless when dealing with the Dread Lord. Although he was dead, his soul still remained in the kingdom of fear. The power of divinity interfered with the whole space. Everything around Sauron was distorted, and the figures of countless demons and petitioners became more and more illusory. At the same time, the whole throne of fear shook slightly. Sauron directly used his divine power to distort reality to break the spiritual world of the Dread Lord. When a slight crack appeared and was noticed by Sauron in his divine form, he immediately raised his hand and pointed to the sky. Change space, divinity power. The key to breaking out of this situation was at this moment. Sauron immediately used the power of the space manipulation to open up a crack, and then prepared to leave with Vivian and Lillian. However, at this moment, something unexpected happened. In the center of the throne of terror, a tall, slender, and beautiful woman appeared. She had a scar on the side of her face, but it didn't affect her beauty at all. Her expression was empty, as though she was a puppet. She turned to Lillian and said, "Witch of Terror, Lillian. Have you forgotten the purpose of your birth? Your existence is to resurrect Father, Son of Fear." As soon as the beautiful woman spoke, Sauron knew her identity. However, most of the scions of fear in the material plane were already dead. The woman in front of him looked like a puppet. She might not even be a living being, but a puppet that the dread demon god had gathered. Finger of Death. Lillian gave the most obvious answer to her question. The little girl raised her hand and threw out a finger of death. Then she curled her lips and said, "I am Lillian. I am me. My fate is not to resurrect the dread demon god. My fate is decided by myself." The beautiful woman dissipated directly under the spell. Lillian's performance made Sauron quite fond of her. She was very much to his liking. It had to be said that under normal circumstances, Lillian, who was not affected by the will of the dread demon god, acted more decisively like Sauron. As soon as the beautiful woman died. But things didn't end like that. A beam of light rose from Sauron's palm and broke through the sky, but a second figure appeared on the throne of terror. This time, it was an elven ranger. Unlike the previous beautiful woman, Sauron knew this elven ranger because they had encountered this elven ranger and were attacked by the hunters. This was the first son of fear that Sauron killed. Now one thing was certain, all the sons of fear that appeared on the throne of terror were dead. Their souls were bound in it for some reason. The dread demon god had obviously left something in advance. The elven ranger didn't say much, but directly attacked Sauron and the others. He tried to stay and kill the three people in front of him. Greater disintegration. A spell appeared directly, and the elven ranger was killed on the spot. However, with the death of the elven ranger, this time two sons of fear appeared on the throne of terror. One was dressed as a wizard, and the other looked like a barbarian. These two sons of fear were obviously more powerful. The will of the dread demon god was preventing them from leaving. When the third batch of sons of fear was killed, the fourth batch of sons of fear appeared again. It was as if they couldn't be killed. In a short time, more than 10 sons of fear had appeared in a row, and they were getting stronger and stronger. Leave it to me. Soren frowned and glanced at the Sons of Fear in front of him. It was now the 5th batch. Just as he broke through the space, the Sons of Fear appeared faster and faster. Death's Hand. Most of the Sons of Fear were close to the legendary level. In front of Soren, they had no power to fight back. However, the later their power seemed to be more and more concentrated, and the Sons of Fear that appeared became stronger and stronger. Soren even had a feeling that he might meet an old opponent. His premonition came true. When Soren killed the 7th batch of Sons of Fear, the whole throne of terror suddenly trembled, and then all the power began to gather toward the center. Then countless blood-red bats appeared, and directly gathered in the center of the throne of terror to form a handsome but very dangerous man in a noble suit. Vampire demigod Reinhardt. The Dread Lord had indeed left a mark on the soul of the Sons of Fear. Although the vampire demigod Reinhardt in front of him still looked like a shell, his expression was obviously not the same as all the previous Sons of Fear. He smiled strangely at Soren and said slowly, "Leave them. Otherwise, you will stay here forever." This arrogant tone made Soren frown. Then he raised his hand and sent out a divine shock wave. He said coldly, "If I can kill you once, I can kill you a second time." The divine shock wave directly hit Reinhardt and sent him flying. However, he was not seriously injured. As the most powerful Son of Fear, his recovery speed was amazing. Soren was always paying attention to the surroundings. Since even Reinhardt had appeared, it was only a matter of time before the Dread Lords will appeared. This would be the first head-on confrontation between them. P.S. That's all for today. Let's prepare and try to finish this paragraph tomorrow or the day after tomorrow. Chapter 868. Haha. Strange laughter sounded. After the demigod vampire took a round of attacks from Soren, he was still intact. His body continued to repair at an amazing speed, and it seemed that the power of the Sons of Fear had gathered on him. From a certain perspective, the current him was even more powerful than when he was alive. No, no, no. The real demigod vampire was dead. His soul was finally imprisoned by the Hellpemer, so the demigod vampire in front of him should be the incarnation of the Dread Lord. Divine Shockwave. Shadow Step, Shadow Divinity. Order, Death. Soren didn't want to fight with his opponent for a long time. This was the spiritual world created by the Dread Lord, which was equivalent to the enemy's home space. The longer the battle dragged on, the more disadvantageous it would be for him. The demigod vampire recovered too quickly, so Soren simply used a round of big moves. At that time, the demigod vampire was in a state of near death, and finally, he used Order, Death to end his opponent. The demigod vampire died on the spot. Although Reinhardt was very strong, Soren was no longer who he used to be. Now, his strength had improved a lot compared to the past. As a god with mid-level divine power, even the demigod vampire would find it difficult to survive one round of his attacks. But at the moment when the demigod vampire died, a little accident happened. His body suddenly turned into a sky full of bats, and then he was resurrected in the throne of fear. It's useless. This is our world. You can't kill me here. The handsome face of the demigod vampire gradually distorted, and a crazy smile appeared on his face. Then he rushed toward Soren again. He had fully recovered. There was no trace of injury at all. If there was any change, it was that his strength seemed to be a little stronger than before. This was something that Soren couldn't understand. He didn't know what power the Dread Lord kept in this space. At present, the only thing that Soren could be sure of was that this space had some connection with the throne of fear in the real world, because even if he wanted to open a crack, it would not be so easy. Plain teleportation, divine spark. However, what was the basis of this spiritual space? Soren was prepared to use brute force to create a crack. He activated his divine power and instantly entered his divine spirit form. Then, he reached out and grabbed Vivian and Lillian. With a wave of his hand, he used his divine power to tear open a spatial rift and teleported them out. The entire space shook violently. The throne of fear that was built in the center of this world was slowly collapsing. Soren let out a sigh of relief after sending the two girls out. However, at this time, the demigod vampire's expression suddenly became ferocious. He roared madly, "Since you insist on sending them away, then you can stay here yourself." The demigod vampire's body began to twist. His originally handsome appearance began to become ferocious, and his body expanded at an astonishing speed. Bone spurs appeared on his back, and a pair of ferocious horns grew out of his forehead. A tail with poisonous thorns also appeared on his tailbone. At this moment, the appearance of the demigod vampire had changed greatly. He looked like a demon from the bottomless abyss. No. It should be said that he looked like a slaughterer. The power of the Dread Lord came from the three gods of death, which meant that he came from the same source as Soren. The ancient god of death, Jurgil. After Jurgil was tired of the constraints of the divine title, he gave his power to the three gods of death at that time. Among them, the god of slaughter, Baal, gave birth to the son of slaughter. The god of tyranny, Bane, was resurrected after death and expanded his divine title into fear. Eventually, he fell in the hands of the Dread Lord. To put it simply, the power of the Dread Lord was inherited from the three gods of death. His core priesthoods were fear and destruction. He himself was also an evolution of death and slaughter. The form that the demigod vampire had now transformed into was a slaughterer full of destructive aura. In other words, he was now the incarnation of the Dread Lord. It finally appeared. The invisible power of the law bound the space. After Vivian and Lillian were sent away, Soren was temporarily trapped in this world. However, his expression did not show any panic. His power and that of the Dread Lord came from the same source. Although Soren was only an intermediate divine power, which was far inferior to the greater divine power of the Dread Lord's body was already dead. It was just an incarnation controlled by his soul, which was not enough to threaten Soren's life. Slaughter, domain. Death, domain. For the first time, the power that was close to the origin collided violently. The blood of the son of slaughter that Soren inherited and the fusion of the death domain spread throughout the entire space, while the demigod vampire's slaughter incarnation shrouded the entire throne with the power of destruction and fear. Shadow, divine title. The space was still in the hands of the Dread Lord, which was a little unfavorable for Soren. So he activated his divine title of Shadow in an instant, and then he saw that everything in the whole world was covered with a gray haze. The sky became gray. The earth became gray. Everything was like a shadow that made people feel depressed and uneasy. In this spiritual world, Soren's shadow even directly reflected on everything, making the whole space look like a shadow plane. A silver-white stream of light emerged. Soren's figure disappeared in an instant. The next moment, he appeared behind the slaughterer. With a storm-like attack, countless wounds immediately appeared on the body of the slaughterer. Blasphemy. Death. The light of divinity emerged. Soren's figure did not leave any trace. It appeared completely out of thin air wherever he wanted to appear. This was the power of the Shadow, divine title. Soren was the master of the shadow. He could travel through shadows that were within the range of the shadow. The end. The incarnation of the vampiric demigod vampire was once again killed by Soren. However, at the moment of the slaughterer's death, suddenly a ferocious and terrifying shadow of the demon god appeared. It madly rushed toward Soren and actually tried to occupy his will. The throne of fear gradually collapsed. The whole spiritual world was on the verge of destruction, and the body of the Dread Lord finally appeared. In the space where Vivian and Lillian had been teleported out, the crazy Dread Lord actually tried to occupy Soren, who had also absorbed the power of the divine title of fear. You're overestimating yourself. Soren looked at the shadow of the demon god that rushed toward him. His whole body turned into a golden humanoid, directly transforming into a divine form and colliding with the Dread Lord. The collision of souls broke out in an instant. At this moment, the throne of fear was completely shattered, and the whole spiritual world collapsed rapidly. After a violent collision, Soren's golden figure turned into a beam of light that went straight into the sky. Then he completely disappeared from this world. Where is this? It only took a moment to travel through space. When Soren defeated the will of the Dread Lord and returned again, he was surprised to find that he did not return to the city of Moder. He did not even return to his body at all. He appeared in a dusky world. A real world. In front of Soren's eyes was a wide river, and he did not know where it flowed to. He could see countless souls floating in the river, and there were vague figures wearing black tattered cloaks and holding huge scythes patrolling around the river. Soren looked at everything in front of him, and his expression seemed a little confused. He murmured, "The river Styx? How did I suddenly appear in the underworld?" This was the territory of the Grim Reaper. The closest to the material plane was the shadow plane, and the next closest to the shadow plane was the spiritual realm. The spiritual realm was already a forbidden area for the living. Most of the creatures there were in the form of spirits and undead. Below the spiritual realm was the river Styx. The river Styx began to branch from here. The main river of the river Styx went directly to the sea of the underworld, and other branches went to the lower plains such as the Bator Inferno, the bottomless abyss, the grey wilderness, and the scorched hell. Very few people entered the underworld. Only the most daring demon soul stealer dared to sneak into the underworld and steal souls from the servants of the Grim Reaper. Soren was now in the underworld. And he appeared in the underworld in the form of a soul. According to the width of the river Styx and the patrolling servants of the Grim Reaper, his position was very likely to be close to the sea of the underworld. Chapter 869. Why did he suddenly come to the underworld? At this moment, Soren was also a little confused because he still remembered what happened at the last moment. At that time, he had already suppressed the power of the Dread Lord. After all, a dead god couldn't cause too much trouble. At the last moment, the Dread Lord was doomed to fail, so he directly attacked Soren, trying to use Soren's connection with absorbing the divinity of fear to occupy his mind. How could he possibly succeed in this? Soren's will was as strong as steel. He directly transformed into his divine form and smashed the spirit of the Dread Lord. As an ancient great divine power, the essence of the Dread Lord's soul was preserved on the throne of fear inside the divine kingdom of fear after his death. In other words, as long as the throne of fear was not destroyed, his spirit and soul could be constantly repaired. Even if the divine will was suppressed and killed by Soren, it would only make him weak, but it couldn't really kill the Dread Lord. To put it simply, the Dread Lord was now like a lich, and now the throne of fear was his phylactery. Something's wrong. After Soren defeated the spiritual entity of the Dread Lord's first attack, he set the teleportation beacon at Mordor City before the space shattered and was ready to directly return to his physical body. Under normal circumstances, it was almost impossible for a god to have an accident when using the divinity of plane teleportation to teleport. Therefore, Soren's appearance in the underworld was most likely due to a man-made reason. And the person who could interfere with his teleportation and set it in the underworld must have a much higher divinity than Soren. There were not many such existences in the whole multiverse. As for the one who had something to do with the underworld, it seemed that there was only one. The ancient god of death, Jurgel. As soon as Soren thought of this, he heard a calm and indifferent voice saying slowly, "The new shadow god, the one outside of fate, welcome to the underworld. I was just wondering when you would think of me." The god of death, Jurgel. Even though Soren had yet to see him, his voice was enough to prove his identity. Jurgel's last words also proved his identity. This was because some abnormally powerful gods had the ability to sense. For their divine names, not to mention speaking them out loud, just hearing them in one's mind would produce a divine sense. As soon as Soren thought of Jurgel, the god of death, he was able to sense the presence of a divine being. This kind of divine power was beyond Soren's understanding of divine beings. The fog in front of him gradually dispersed. A pair of death's servants in tattered grey cloaks appeared in front of Soren. In front of them was a boat of the river Styx, with necromancers holding books and pens on both sides. They were all natives of the underworld. The Grim Reaper rarely received souls personally. To the deities who held the divine title of Death, their duty was to maintain the order of death in the multiverse and the movement of souls. On the other hand, the death that mortals would sometimes unwittingly see was actually an attendant chosen from their believers. Just like the otherworldly oracles that Soren prepared to help him manage the kingdom of God, the death servants were a different kind of oracles. These existences similar to petitioners would not be trapped in the underworld. They were endowed with a little divinity of death and could travel between many planes. Lord of Shadows, please come with me. A hoarse voice was heard. The necromancer with a withered face made an inviting gesture to Soren and slowly said, "My lord, Jurgel, wants to see you." No one knew how long this necromancer had existed. His soul was full of the smell of decay. The ancient Grim Reaper, Jurgel, liked to record death. Many of his followers started recording all kinds of deaths in the Thorium era. The necromancer in front of him was probably above level 35. Although his name was not spread in the multiverse, Soren could sense that this necromancer was not much weaker than some famous liches left behind from the Nesser era. This was the foundation of time. As the oldest Grim Reaper in the multiverse, Jurgel probably had many servants like this under his command. Yes. Soren was not afraid at all. Instead, he was a little curious and directly followed the necromancer to the boat of the Styx. Jurgel was not a god that needed to be afraid. This was because to a certain extent, he was a god that disliked the affairs of the other gods. Even when the god of murder went crazy, Jurgel only had a slight trace of mockery. He did not have the slightest intention of interfering. Even before the rise of the three death gods, Jurgel was already tired of his priesthood. He gave away almost all of his core priesthoods, only keeping a part related to the death records. In the following years, most of Jurgel's tasks were to help the King of the Dead familiarize himself with his priesthood. After giving up his priesthood, Jurgel had been living like this. In a way that was close to being a hermit, he first assisted the King of Bones, Mirko, then the King of the Dead, Klemvox. Other than helping them maintain the law of death, Jurgel did not interfere with the affairs of the other gods. Currently, Jurgel was a minor divine power. There was almost no religion in the mortal world. Only the oldest writings recorded a little bit of it. In the Eastern Kingdom, there was a small inscription that recorded such a short passage. The ancient Grim Reaper, Jurgel, was tired of fulfilling his duties. When he was almost forgotten by the world, he gave most of his priesthoods to the god of tyranny, Bane, the god of murder, Baal, and the king of bones, Mirko. After the death of these gods, he continued to serve the god of murder, Sirik, and the king of the dead, Klemvox. He was only loyal to the position of King of the Dead, so if the incumbent could not fulfill his duties properly, he would secretly overthrow him. Jurgel barely maintained his cooperation with the former Grim Reaper, Klemvox, and was quite harmonious with the current Grim Reaper, and still had a contemptuous attitude toward Sirik. In the Eastern Kingdom, there was an abandoned ruin, and there was such a short passage recorded in it. Why did the Grim Reaper, Jurgel, want to see him? The first thing that came to Soren's mind was someone outside of fate. Gloria also said that he was outside of the river of fate. According to the divination of the northern witches, people outside of fate were full of infinite variables. The most representative of them were Sirik and Klemvox, who had inherited the priesthood of death respectively. Although Jurgel was powerful, Soren was not afraid. The source of his power came from Jurgel, the Grim Reaper, and this existence almost no longer interfered with the affairs of mortals and gods. P.S. First update. Today is the 3rd. Chapter 870. Soren soon met Jurgel. This legendary ancient god of death looked very ordinary, just like an ordinary necromancer scholar. At this moment, he was holding a quill pen and writing something on a parchment on the boat of the river Styx. The church of Jurgel had always been recording death, and it could even be said that it was waiting for the moment when everything ended. Because in the church of Jurgel, it was believed that even the planes and the universe had a moment of death. There were even people who once thought that the real mission of Jurgil was to witness and record the death of the entire multiverse. The Avatar crisis did not seem to have much impact on Jurgil, because his priesthood had basically been given away. The king of the dead, Clemvox, should have fallen to the material plane, but Jurgil seemed to have no impact on the underworld. But it seemed that he should not be able to enter his own kingdom at the moment. But there was nothing in his kingdom. At his level, he probably did not even need a kingdom. Great divinity. The existence closest to the great divine power in the entire multiverse. Although he gave up the priesthood of death, he was still the most powerful ancient god. If the gods were the product of the law, then at Jurgil's level, he was close to the great law. In the long history of the multiverse, he was the only god who gave his power to others because he was tired of his priesthood. And after so many years of divine wars and catastrophes, he was still alive and well with only a minor divine power. No god dared to provoke him. He became a bystander, and only occasionally helped the new god of death to manage things. There was one thing that must be mentioned. Soren had always thought that the expansion of the river Styx was inseparable from the god of death, Jurgil. Because in the most ancient times, the river Styx was just a small branch, but now the river Styx had run through the entire multiverse. There were even branches of the river Styx on Mountain Paradise. It was worth mentioning that the god of death, Jurgil, had a good relationship with the ancient sun god, Amonada. After the ancient sun god fell, the reincarnation of Luo Shanda was now the god of light. The expansion of the river Styx was not recorded in history. But since the birth of many planes, the river Styx had flowed from the highest level of Mountain Paradise to the deepest part of the abyss. Soren would never believe that Jurgil, the god of death, wasn't behind all of this. Furthermore, there had been the Wall of the Faithless in the past, but the Nether River was now maintaining the cycle of life and death across the multiverse. Very few souls were sealed inside the Wall of the Faithless, with most souls being transported to the Origin Sea through the Nether River and eventually reborn from death. That was how the development of death came about, and Jurgil's shadow was behind everything. Young deity. Jurgil's face was withered, and he looked like a mummy. As the oldest god, he didn't seem to care about his appearance. The ancient god of death slowly put down the quill and looked up at Soren. You seem to have a lot of questions. Yes. Soren nodded. After thinking for a while, he asked directly, did you summon me here? Jurgil glanced at him and said calmly, I guess so. Soren frowned. Why did you summon me to the underworld, Lord Jurgil? He went straight to the point. For a bystander like Jurgil, Soren didn't need to beat around the bush. Even in this avatar's crisis, Jurgil was still a little detached from the world, because even this avatar's crisis couldn't completely affect him. If gods were regarded as gods, then the avatar's crisis was a tribulation of heaven and earth, and Jurgil had already transcended the tribulation. There must be a reason for such a being to meet Soren in person. Such a being must have his own mission. Just like Father Oak could sacrifice himself without hesitation, Jurgil must have his own ultimate goal, and it was very likely that this goal was beyond all the gods. Just a small matter. Jurgil's tone didn't change. He said slowly, everything has an end. And those who welcome the end but don't want to return to death always make me feel a little troubled. I have a little trouble that I need you to help me solve. Trouble? Soren listened to Jurgil thoughtfully. Welcome the end but don't want to return to death. Are you talking about the Dread Lord? The Dread Lord was dead. But he wasn't completely dead yet. His power came from Jurgil, and his state of being near death could indeed make Jurgil feel troubled. Jurgil nodded slowly. Then, he looked at Soren and said, people outside of fate are full of infinite variables. Transcending death means transcending fate. The last avatar's crisis gave birth to a group of new gods. And this time's avatar's crisis means that the laws of the multiverse have changed again. Some gods should disappear with the laws, but because of you, there are some changes outside of fate. What I need to do now is to correct the part that belongs to death. The Dread Lord should have fallen. He turned death into pure destruction and fear, which has deviated from the true meaning of death. I hope you can destroy him. If possible, it's best to take over a part of the clergy of death. Although Clemvox is a qualified god of death, he's still too kind. Eternal sleep is just to maintain the rules of death, but it can't make death go any further. The Lord of Eternal Sleep, Clemvox. After Clemvox took over the clergy of death, he was obsessed with letting the undead enter eternal sleep. He was not as cruel as the other gods of death. After the last Avatar's crisis, Clemvox took over the clergy of death. He spent most of his time with Jurgil in the Crystal Tower of the Underworld, learning about the responsibilities and requirements of the position of King of the Dead from the latter. Although the Forgotten One, another name of Jurgil's cold practical views and merciless cold-bloodedness troubled Clemvox, he still respected Jurgil very much. It was not an exaggeration to say that he believed in this ancient god. Although the two got along quite well, Clemvox was a kind warrior when he was alive. There were many contradictions between his ideas and Jurgil's. Strictly speaking, Jurgil the god of death should be ruthless and neutral. He believed that death treated all things the same, and there was no difference between good and evil. Clemvox, on the other hand, was more inclined to kindness. The church had been doing more to appease the undead for so many years, and he even developed the field of eternal sleep. Is that all? Soren frowned and looked at Jurgil, then slowly said, "The Dread Lord is an enemy that I have to destroy. Even without your order, I will find a way to kill him completely. The Dread Lord must die. If he doesn't die, Vivian won't be safe." Jurgil was not surprised by Soren's words, because he had long noticed this new god. When Soren became a god, he had already entered Jurgil's sight. He said lightly, "If that's the case, there's another thing that may trouble you. But this is also a fate that you can't escape." Chapter 871. Fate. Soren could not help but frown when he heard that. Death god Jurgil did not have any reaction to this. Instead, he said calmly, "As a new god, your performance has surprised many people. However, there was someone who was even more amazing than you. In just a few years, he went from a mortal to a god, and a powerful one at that. He obtained most of the death priesthoods. Do you know who he is?" Soren could not help but tremble when he heard Jurgil's words. He then said in a low voice, "Yes. He is Cyric." Jurgil's eyes moved a little when he mentioned this name. He then continued, "That's right. He is Cyric. The fastest rising mortal in the history of the multiverse. He even became one of the most powerful gods. Clemvox is the king of the dead. But the one who obtained most of my death priesthoods was Cyric. He first took Mirko's death priesthoods, and then Baal's massacre priesthoods. He even took in most of Banon's believers when he died. However, Cyric's ambition was too great. He was eventually destroyed by his own crazy ambition. As a god, you should know a little about this history. Later, under my guidance, Clemvox took Mirko's death priesthoods from Cyric and became the king of the dead. Cyric's madness did not stop because of this. After losing Mirko's death priesthoods, he turned his ambition to the god of tyranny, Banon, who had just been resurrected. This battle between the gods was not recorded in history. However, in the end, he succeeded. The god of tyranny, Banon, fell. The priesthoods that originally belonged to Banon became empty because of this. However, the gods at that time were already afraid of what Cyric had done. They were afraid that Cyric would cause another catastrophe after obtaining the power of the god of tyranny. Hence, the priesthood of the god of tyranny eventually fell into the hands of a lucky person in this conspiracy. He is the current Dread Lord, but because of Cyric, the Dread Lord moved his kingdom to the abyss. Cyric's crazy ambition has made the gods dissatisfied and afraid. After the death of the god of tyranny, the gods finally decided to join forces to punish and judge Cyric. In the end, he was exiled and sealed. Even now, he is still imprisoned in the space where the gods sealed him. The words of death Jurgil ended here. However, Soren had already understood the general situation of the matter. This matter was indeed related to the god of murder, because according to the original history, Sirik should have escaped during the middle and later stages of the Avatar crisis. For Sirik, this troublemaker, most of the gods had a headache because his ambition was too great. He was not satisfied with being one of the strongest gods at that time. He even tried to become the only true god at that time. If he had not done this, Sirik's ending would not have been so tragic. At that time, the gods could not defeat Sirik at all without joining forces. At his peak, Sirik was very close to the great divine power. At the same time, he mastered the priesthoods of death, slaughter, and conspiracy, and incorporated most of the original followers of the three gods of death. It could be said that he became the evil god with the most followers and the most priesthoods at that time. What Death Jurgil was really worried about was not the Dread Lord, but the god of murder, Sirik, who had not yet been released. The priesthood of Baal was on him. At present, the situation of the death god system was that Clemvox was in charge of the priesthood of the King of the Dead. He was currently a great divine power, and the Dread Lord was also a great divine power, but now he had fallen. The core of the slaughter priesthood was on Sirik, and he was also in charge of the conspiracy priesthood. At the end of the first Avatar crisis, Sirik regarded Clemvox as his greatest enemy, and at the same time, he hated the third-generation goddess of magic very much. However, later, the god of tyranny was resurrected, and he regarded tyranny as his greatest threat. At that time, after the conspiracy to kill the god of tyranny, Sirik also took part of tyranny's priesthood. Together with the original slaughter priesthood, he was almost the most dangerous among the great divine powers. Therefore, even if Sirik had been sealed for a long time, when he ran out during the Avatar crisis, his power was maintained above the intermediate divine power. He was not like Soren's half-baked intermediate divine power now. He was the kind of intermediate divine power that was above the old gods, and very close to the great divine power. According to the progress of the past history, Sirik was scheming for the power of the Dread Lord as soon as he came out, and if he could seize the priesthood of the Dread Lord, then even the current King of the Dead, Clemvox, would not be his opponent at all. He was the existence that gave Death Jurgil a headache. Sure enough, they wanted him to deal with Sirik. Soren quickly guessed the whole story, but his heart was a little heavy. Jurgil was right, Sirik was one of the enemies that Soren had to face. Because Soren himself had the blood of the son of Slaughter, he now had the Slaughter domain and received the information of the Slaughter priesthood. It was because Sirik was sealed that Soren could steal and obtain the Slaughter priesthood. Otherwise, if Sirik was fine, he would not be able to get the information of the Slaughter priesthood so easily. Moreover, Sirik was a very narrow-minded, self-centered, and extremely extreme god. With such a character, if he ran out after being sealed for a long time and suddenly found that part of his Slaughter priesthood had been taken away by Soren, then what would he do? Soren would almost certainly start a war with him, and in this hostile relationship, there would be a fight for the power of the Dread Lord. Everything started to become clear. Soren immediately grasped the key to breaking the situation, and that was the dead Dread Lord. Now, Soren and Sirik were both mid-level gods, and even if there was a gap, it would not be too big. Sirik was a loner, and he had made too many enemies. His enemies were everywhere in the pantheon of gods. Soren's relationship with other gods was not bad, and he even had some gods as allies. If they really fought, the chances of winning should be about 50%. So the power of the Dread Lord was the key. If Soren could obtain the power of the Dread Lord, or if he could help Vivian obtain the power of the Dread Lord, then there would be no problem in dealing with Sirik. But if Sirik obtained the power of the Dread Lord, then Soren would have almost no chance of winning. That was probably the reason why Jurgil wanted to see him today. Perhaps to this primordial god of death who no longer cared about the affairs of the gods, Sirik was a troublemaker who caused a huge headache. P.S. Third update. Please pay attention. Chapter 872. Sirik was an anomaly among the natives. Looking at the history of the entire multiverse, no one rose faster than him. Even the adventurers who were lucky enough to become gods during the Avatar crisis were far behind him. If one only looked at the first half of Siric's story, then he had the aura of a protagonist. He went all the way from a mortal to one of the most powerful gods at that time. However, if one added Siric's record of courting death in the second half of the story, then the whole story had the illusion of a protagonist turning into a villain. It could be said that Siric finally forced the gods to join forces to seal him because he was too ambitious and loved courting death. After all, he was the one who had gathered all the clergies of the three gods of death. Even the main gods of the pantheon did not dare to look down on him. Siric, on the other hand, had been acting alone for a very long time. He only had temporary allies and no subordinate gods. Soren fell into silence. He was not very confident in dealing with Siric. Every time he mentioned Siric, he felt that this guy seemed to have the aura of a protagonist. If he wanted to deal with him, Soren felt that he needed to hug the legs of the goddess of luck. Although Siric was unlucky, that was also the effect of the protagonist's aura. If it was another god who courted death like that, it would not be as simple as being sealed. They would probably be dead. Schemes that would have been punishable by death in the hands of other gods were merely sealed away in the hands of Siric. And he actually came out during the time of troubles. Dealing with Siric was much more difficult than dealing with the Shadow Lord. Although Siric's strength had been greatly reduced, his clergies were still murder, lie, deceit, and illusion. His domains were chaos, destruction, slaughter, evil, illusion, and crafty. That's right. Siric also had the crafty domain, and his abilities were almost all combat type. While Soren was deep in thought, Grim Reaper Jurgel spoke again. Dealing with Siric won't be easy. But I can give you some help. In any case, this little bit of power won't be of much use to me. Since that's the case, let it be the foundation of your death priesthood. After that, the ancient god of death, Jurgel, pointed at Soren, and a golden light appeared. Then, a strong aura of death rushed into Soren's body. Rows of data appeared, received the gift of the Grim Reaper, Jurgel. You've obtained the divine power of death. You have obtained partial information about the divine domain of death. The second message from the death clergy appeared. The god of death, Jurgel, gave a portion of his divine power to Soren, helping him get one step closer to the divine domain of death. My priesthood doesn't suit you. After Jurgel was done, he slowly said, so you will have to rely on yourself to wield the power of the divine domain of death. For now. The god of death, Jurgel, only kept 3 priesthoods related to death. They were Fatalism, Death Recorder, and Tomb Guard. These 3 were insignificant priesthoods. And these priesthoods didn't suit Soren at all. The only reason Jurgel kept these priesthoods was to make it easier for him to record deaths. As a great existence of divinity, he almost gave up most of his divinity and divine power. All right. After Jurgel was done, he waved his hand and said, you should go back now. Don't stay in the underworld for too long. The gods were very weak during the time of troubles, and the saints couldn't resist the corrosion of the underworld. The underworld was a very special place. Under normal circumstances, even if it wasn't during the Avatar crisis, the gods didn't like to enter the underworld. Soren came back to his senses. He bowed slightly to Jurgel in front of him to express his gratitude, then turned and walked out. In any case, Jurgel helped him get one step closer to obtaining the divine domain of death. The ancient god of death had been looking for a suitable agent. The 3 gods of death of the previous generation were the first agents he chose, and now the king of the dead, Clemvox, was the second agent he chose. This existence's domain of death was beyond any other god. Even Soren didn't know what he wanted. After leaving the boat of the Styx, Soren directly teleported back to the city of Moder. There was nothing to stay in the underworld, and Clemvox, the king of the dead, might not be very friendly to Soren. After all, his relationship with the goddess of magic was complicated, and there was a certain competitive relationship with her. As soon as he returned to the city of Moder, Soren saw Vivian standing nervously beside him, and in front of him was Soren's body, which seemed to be meditating with his eyes closed. Soul separation was very simple for Soren. In the blink of an eye, Soren returned to his body, and at this moment, the little girl saw him wake up and rushed to him, holding his hand tightly and saying, "Brother, you're finally awake. I was so worried." Soren smiled and touched the little girl's head. Suddenly, he seemed to think of something and said, "Are you Vivian or Lillian?" The little girl's expression froze when she heard the words, then she whispered, "I'm Vivian. Lillian rarely comes out. She usually controls the body in the afternoon or evening." "Brother. I'm sorry." As if she felt that she had done something wrong, Vivian apologized without saying a word. Soren originally wanted to scold her, but after seeing the god of death, Jurgil, Sirik's existence was like a mountain on his body, making him feel a little nervous. The Dread Lord had not been dealt with yet, and now Sirik had come out. Soren felt that time was not on his side. Compared to these things, Lillian's existence was not that important. As long as he could get rid of the Dread Lord and Sirik, it would be easier to reconstruct the body and soul separation. Sirik must also be killed. Because even if he killed the Dread Lord, if he did not kill Sirik, he would definitely turn his attention to Vivian, who had just inherited the Dread Lord's power. A new god who had just inherited the power. Oh my god. What an easy lamb to deal with. If Sirik did not die, he would be plotting all day long to kill Vivian and take her godhood. Lillian was still within Soren's acceptable range. However, Sirik belonged to the category of gods who must die. Soren felt that he had to think carefully, especially to organize his thoughts and recall the gods who were the most hostile to Sirik. To deal with someone like Sirik, who had great luck, he could only think of ways to borrow his strength. P.S. First update. There is another chapter for today. Chapter 873. Gloria returned to the city of Moder the next day. She brought back a lot of alchemy devices and went into crazy research as soon as she came back. Soren didn't tell her about Sirik. As a mortal, she couldn't help much now. Telling her would make Gloria worry more. Vivian woke up in the form of a demigod. At present, the only thing the little girl lacked was a clergy. As long as she had a clergy, she could be promoted to minor divine power. A lot of things happened during this time. First of all, the goddess of fortune appeared in the city of wealth. The reason seemed to be related to the legendary lucky coin. Soren didn't know if he should get close to the goddess because he had the blessing of the goddess of misfortune. Then, the elves and the orcs broke out again. This time, the scale was much smaller. It seemed that the two divine systems had restrained a lot. The internal strife of the drows had stopped. The Queen of Spiders should have regained control of everything. There were gradually signs of unification inside the Underdark. The Principality of Rossard was more serious. As Soren guessed, the Duke of Red Dragon's wife was backed by a demon duke. And it was the legendary Queen of Yuma, Lord of Hell, the daughter of Asmodeus. This was like poking a hornet's nest. Even the Church of the God of Light was now having a headache. It was not difficult to deal with the Queen of Yuma, but if Asmodeus was drawn out, then only the God of Light himself could deal with him. Right. There was another standard of great divinity. In addition to death, the other was the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus. He had experienced the ancient war and killed many ancient demons. The Queen of Yuma should be the first demon duke to appear in the eyes of the world. As the daughter of Asmodeus, she had always tried to prove her ability. She didn't rely on her father's power, but relied on her own strength to achieve the status of demon duke. So this time, the trouble caused by the Church of Light would not be so easy to solve. At least the confrontation between the demons and the church would last for a while. Soren had been paying attention to the outside world. However, because he knew about Sirik, he didn't want to intervene in many things. The latest news was related to the Halflings. As a race with a small population, the Halflings also had their own gods. This time, the Halflings' guardian goddess, Yoda, seemed to have appeared. The goddess who had created the halfling race had appeared in the Shire region and had fought with a god. As for who it was still uncertain. In addition, one thing that had happened in the beginning had been made clear. It was the Death Valley mentioned earlier, where a strong aura of life suddenly appeared. This was obviously a miracle created when a god who was in charge of life fell to the mortal world. This goddess was Angress, the elven goddess of life. She was also the current wife of the elven god system's chief god, Corlon Larison, the person who replaced the Queen of Spiders, Lolth, as the matriarch of the elven pantheon. She was in charge of spring, birth, fertility, and planting, an extension of the life priesthood. It was because she fell to the mortal world that there were strong signs of life in the Death Valley. At present, she had returned to the elven god system. As for why she didn't see her husband until now, the outside world didn't know the reason at all. A few days passed in the blink of an eye. The third wave of the Avatar crisis was still brewing, and the figures of the demons began to appear frequently. It seemed that in the first few waves, they had become more active than the demons. In the eyes of the demons, the material plane was a rich treasure. A large number of high-quality souls were waiting for them to harvest, which could greatly improve their power and status. Recently, some special people began to appear in Motor City. Most of these people were women, and they were all young and beautiful women who could sing and dance. Most of these beautiful women were bards, dancers, performers, and so on. They had a special emblem on their chests, which was a triangle formed by 3 different colors, yellow, orange, red, of hexagons. This was the emblem of the goddess of joy. No one knew when it started, but the believers of the goddess of joy came uninvited. Now, many performers serving the goddess of joy could be seen in Port Motor. They either sang and danced in the taverns or performed directly on the streets. From time to time, passers-by couldn't help but stop and watch. Occasionally, there would be a burst of cheers. These beautiful women all had good skills, and their beautiful dance made Port Mordor happy. Soren had been secretly paying attention to these things, but he had no intention of directly interfering. The goddess of joy had her own mission. At present, because of the Avatar crisis, there was no joy in many places. When war came, gods like the goddess of joy would become very awkward, which was why her followers came to the city of Mordor. At present, in the material plane, only a few places, such as Motor City, Arendelle, and the Northern Council, could still make them happy. As for other places, those who were still hungry had no energy to watch their dances and songs. The goddess of joy, Li-er. She was the goddess of joy, happiness, dance, festivals, and freedom. Her domains included chaos, charm, family, kindness, and so on. She was a kind goddess who liked to do whatever she wanted. She was also one of the goddesses who was inclined to hedonism. She basically did not have much ambition. Many of her believers were extremely devout, and she was popular all over the world. She was regarded as the propagator of joy. Her temple often raised donations by holding grand celebrations, and then put the money raised into various seemingly unplanned uses, such as concentrating on beautifying a public area or spending a lot of money to hold a feast for a serious local lord. A feast. In short, this goddess and her believers were a little funny. The goddess of wealth and the goddess of joy used to be very close allies, but after the previous goddess of wealth's accident in the time of troubles, some of her believers began to turn to the goddess of joy, so the relationship between the two goddesses later became much colder. The enemy of the goddess of joy was the goddess of pain and torture, Lauvita. The goddess of pain, injury, agony, torment, suffering, and torture, the aforementioned maiden of pain. The hatred between the two goddesses had been long-standing. As early as the last time of troubles, the high priestess of the goddess of joy, Clan Angelos, who was once the lover of the goddess of joy, was murdered by the forces of the local Lauvita sect. Under the instructions of the goddess of joy, her believers formed an assassination cult called the Scarlet Dancers, and began to tour the world. At the same time, under the cover of delicate and deadly dances, they used dancing shoes with hidden blades to take the lives of the Maiden of Pain's believers. From then on, the battle between the two churches never stopped. The sea could accommodate all rivers. Soren was tolerant enough of the arrival of the believers of the goddess of joy. He sent people to give these performers a piece of land and let them build a small temple to worship the goddess of joy. Of course, this was not without a price. Soren was having a headache over Vivian's priesthood, so he was very interested in the position of the Maiden of Pain, Lauvita. Originally, he wanted to let the High Priestess contact them. But considering that the goddess of joy was a famous lesbian goddess, he thought that he should have the opportunity to contact her again. P.S. Second update. Please pay attention. Chapter 874. The monthly votes will be voided soon. Everyone who has a monthly vote, please vote. After 12:00, it was cleared out. Soren began to plan for Vivian's priesthood. What do you think Vivian should choose as her starting priesthood? The priesthood of fear is still too early. She must first have a transitional priesthood. Chapter 875. Port Mordor, Deepwater Alley. It only took a day for the believers of the Lady of Joy to build a small altar. Most of these believers were quite handsome, and many of the performers had to have a certain level of appearance. At this moment, these believers were performing the last important ritual. A pair of beautiful human girls picked up 2 weapons and threw them on the ground. Then, under the guidance of the priests, the surrounding believers covered the weapons with a pair of fresh flowers, completely burying the 2 weapons in it. This ceremony was called Abandon Violence, and it was also a ceremony that represented the principles of the Lady of Joy. This goddess did not like to fight. Then, the believers began to prepare for the celebration. As mentioned before, the Lady of Joy was a bit of a funny goddess, and those who believed and served her were also a bit funny. In the Church of the Goddess of Joy, almost every holiday that had nothing to do with evil beliefs was a reason for the church to hold celebrations. In other words, they could always find reasons to hold all kinds of celebrations full of joy. As for how many people would participate, it was not something they could decide. The arrival of the Goddess of Joy added a touch of vitality to the city of Mordor. However, Soren had always had strict restrictions on the gods. He did not exclude people who liked and believed in the Goddess of Joy, but he would never allow this kind of hedonism to prevail in the city of Mordor. Therefore, the whole process of the ceremony was filled with members of the church and a small number of hedonistic civilians in the port of Mordor. Flowers, wine, music, and dancing. A simple celebration soon began. Beautiful singers danced around the altar, and bards played a variety of instruments next to them. The priest was praying in it, and with the atmosphere of joy, a little light invisible to the naked eye was gathering. This was the divine power of the Goddess of Joy being injected into the altar. She had noticed the altar that she had just built and quickly connected her faith to it. This meant that she had been silently paying attention to the city of Mordor. Otherwise, under normal circumstances, many celebrations would be held to attract the attention of the gods if an altar wanted to open. The celebration ceremony did not last long. Soon, the priest placed a girl's statue that had been prepared long ago in the center. Then a divine light emerged. This was a faint light visible to the naked eye, which meant that the Goddess of Joy had recognized this place as her temple. It was different from the Old Lady of Wealth and the influential sea goddess. The strength of the Church of Joy was only enough to build a small temple. These believers would earn money through performances and then give it to the temple to gradually expand. The Goddess of Joy had a large number of bards as believers. The church controlled a large number of theaters and circuses, which would definitely greatly enrich the entertainment of Mordor City in the future. Soren looked down at all this from the sky. After the believer of the Goddess of Joy had completed all of this, he transformed into an ordinary young man and walked past the people who were immersed in the celebration, arriving at the back of the temple. No one noticed Soren's arrival, except for the golden light that appeared on the statue of the girl on the altar. "Welcome," he said. The Lord of Mordor." the protector of the half-elves. With a little bit of light, the light of faith behind the temple converged into a graceful figure of a girl. She bowed slightly to Soren and said in a pleasant voice, "Thank you very much for accepting my church. May joy be with you." The figure of the goddess of joy appeared. While bowing to Soren, she also used a relative honorific. As a veteran god, although she had existed longer than Sauron, because of the level of divine power, Sauron's status was far higher than hers. In the future, she would be much lower than Sauron in the Pantheon Temple. Although Mordor is ruled by order, it does not exclude joy. Soren looked at the beautiful girl in front of him and said with a smile, "I hope your arrival can bring more happiness to the civilians." Hearing Soren's words, the goddess of joy fell into deep thought. Soren's words were not a simple greeting. As a god, the goddess of joy obviously understood Soren's meaning. He could accept joy, but he couldn't accept pleasure. As for the idea of freedom of the goddess of joy, it obviously wouldn't work in Mordor. Soren pointed out the order to tell the goddess of joy that she must pay attention to this. Mordor was a city full of order. He could accept the goddess of joy, but he didn't agree with the idea of freedom of the Chaos Camp. "I understand." The goddess of joy's smile had a hint of bitterness. If it weren't for the Avatar crisis, she definitely wouldn't want her believers to develop in Mordor. But now the continent was full of war, and many people couldn't even fill their stomachs. The goddess of joy's position was more awkward. She nodded gently to Soren and said, "My believers won't bring you any trouble." "That's good." Soren smiled and said, "There will be a large celebration in Mordor soon. Maybe your church can be responsible for hosting it." He had to give her a carrot after giving her a stick. Mordor did have a celebration. As a new city, the day of the establishment of Mordor was an important celebration. Soren's military parade was also an important celebration. These celebrations were handed over to the Church of Joy to help the Goddess of Joy gather some believers. Looking at the believers of the Church of Joy, there were more bards than priests. Soren guessed that the Goddess of Joy's situation wasn't very good. Perhaps many priests couldn't give her divine spells. This was the limitation of the priesthood. The priesthood she had was not good for the time of turmoil. Then it's time to talk about business. Soren didn't come in person to chat. He looked around, waved his hand, and a divine barrier appeared. Then he said, "I want to know the whereabouts of the goddess of abuse, Lauvita. She's your old rival. You should know something about her, right?" The goddess of joy was stunned for a moment and then said, "Is she also an enemy of Sir Soren?" "If it's Lauvita, I do know something about her." Soren didn't answer her question. He just looked at the goddess of joy in front of him and smiled. "The Maiden of Pain has been fighting with you for thousands of years. I think you would be happy to see such an enemy disappear, right?" The goddess of joy was silent. Obviously, Soren's words touched her heart and made her hate him. This famous goddess had several lovers who were priestesses in the church, and many of these priestesses died in the hands of the Maiden of Pain's believers. P.S. The first chapter. There's one more chapter. Chapter 876. Talon City. This used to be one of the few big cities in the south. However, due to the prevalence of corruption, the law gradually became a tool for the rich and powerful. Gradually, the city began to show signs of decline and decay. More and more merchants avoided this place where they needed to bribe to do anything. However, the decline of Talon City also meant the rise of some other forces. They were the forces that belonged to the gray area and the churches of many evil gods. At this moment, in an underground prison, a group of people in cloaks were kneeling in front of the altar, praying. Standing in the middle of the altar was a beautiful girl in revealing clothes. She held a long whip in her hand, and after praying for a while, she suddenly whipped herself violently. This time, she used almost all of her strength. A bloody whip mark appeared on the beautiful girl's back. At this moment, the other people under the altar also took out their whips and whipped themselves. Then, they knelt on the ground and prayed. Many of Levita's believers and priests specialized in using whips. It was just like how many of Soren's believers were good at using machetes. These were all changed because of the preference of the god. All of this did not end quickly. After a period of self-abuse, the believers began the next step of the prayer ritual. This special ritual was called Flame of Candlelight. The believers first chanted hymns and danced around the burning candles. Then, under the guidance of the priest, some beautiful girls began to appear. They kept burning their bodies with the flames of the candles. At the same time, they asked other believers to drip the candles on their bodies. The whole process lasted for a while until the ritual was completed. The high-grade priest extinguished the candles with holy wine. At this moment, the ritual reached its climax. When all the believers were covered with whip marks and candles, a divine radiance appeared on the altar. Then, a hazy figure of a girl appeared. Then, everyone began to pray passionately. The priest even sang hymns loudly. The whole ritual lasted for about 2 hours. When everything was over, the girl on the altar gently waved her hand. A breath that made people feel peaceful and happy appeared. At this time, the priests also began to cast divine spells to heal flesh wounds. Under normal circumstances, they would only heal minor injuries. Occasionally, there would be believers who would hurt themselves badly to please the goddess. The Maiden of Pain, Lauvita, was an aggressive, domineering, and fearless goddess. She protected all the torturers, sadists, and bullies on the continent. The Maiden of Pain was obsessed with inflicting pain, whether physical or psychological. Laurita's church usually had a huge influence in large cities that were in decline, because the corrupt bureaucracy in the cities usually turned a blind eye to their corrupt behavior, and the people in power in the church were all female humans or half-elves. The church usually recruited new members from the rich and powerful of the city. Her priests were unrelenting in their tortures, or in their feigned love with the young nobleman, and then in their cruel abandonment of them, and they endeavored to destroy all affections and friendships, and then to flirt with their victims with pretended intimacy, and then to ridicule them. For the believers of the Maiden of Pain, excellent acting skills and beautiful appearances were very useful tools. The Maiden of Pain's alignment was lawful evil. Under normal circumstances, evil gods of this alignment acted like devils, and most of them had a plan. This could be seen from the teachings of the Maiden of Pain. Judging from the church's rituals, the Maiden of Pain wasn't much different from other evil gods. But if you read her teachings, you would realize that this goddess wasn't simple. The teachings of the Church of Pain were long. If you simply picked out a few, you could summarize them into the following few. This world is full of pain and suffering, so the only thing we can do is to face the inevitable pain, and pay back more pain to those who caused our pain. Article 1 of the doctrine, mercy is the best companion to pain and pain, because only mercy can deepen the pain of torture. Remember that endless cruelty and torment will only make the abused rise up in revolt, and so it is necessary to stop the torment occasionally, on a whim, and give them unexpected comfort and healing, so that they may not understand the will of the goddess, and thus the foolish people will all the more thirst for the mercy of the Maiden of Pain. The second doctrine of the Church. The whip, the flame, and the cold are the 3 useful tools given by the goddess to her believers. Article 6 of the doctrine, no matter when we inflict torture and punishment, we should preach the teachings of Laurita. Pain is a comprehensive trial, it can strengthen the mental resilience, and let those who have survived the ordeal gain true joy. Only those who know the rules of the goddess can inflict real punishment and abuse. Article 9 of the doctrine, wherever there is a whip, there will be Goddess Laurita. Fear Laurita and desire her grace. The last paragraph of the doctrine. The teachings of the Maiden of Pain were very interesting. Especially in the last paragraph, pain is a comprehensive trial, it can strengthen the mental resilience, and let those who have survived the ordeal gain true joy. This was the highest realm of masochism. Motor City. Council Hall. When Soren decided to deal with the Maiden of Pain, all the information about her was secretly sent to him by the spies in Motor City. Soren's church did not have many things, but there were a lot of rogues, and the efficiency of collecting information was several times better than other churches. The information from the goddess of joy was very important, but Soren still needed to deal with the maiden of pain, and her church still needed to be dealt with by Soren's church. In this way, he must first know the internal situation of the abused church. The other things were relatively ordinary. After reading a lot of information, Soren became a little interested in Lorita's teachings. Very surprised. Soren actually saw a little bit of positive energy in Lorita's teachings, even if it was just a nice way to put it. But if this point was used to convert, it would be of great use. Treat pain as training. If he could grasp this point and convert it, then there would be no problem with Vivian's clergy. A pure abuse clergy was still too low-end. Soren's initial goal to deal with Lorita was the pain clergy. As for the other tortures, torture, whipping, and so on, they were completely unpresentable. Pain, and suffering. These were the real useful clergy. It could be applied to the gods of the evil alignment, and it could also be applied to the gods of the good alignment. The priesthoods of Vivian and Lillian were to be chosen between them. That's right. Soren thought that the clergy could be extended in two directions. Lillian was obviously in the evil alignment, and Vivian was definitely in the good alignment. If pain was the starting clergy, both of them could be considered. Chapter 877. Vivian's priesthood was initially determined. However, regarding the two extreme extensions of pain, simply speaking, it could be understood as S and M. This point still needed to be considered. Everyone cast some monthly votes to give Fu Tu some energy. Let Fu Tu directly evolve into the corrupted demon king and finish writing this paragraph. Chapter 878. The morning sun shone on the city of Mordor. Last night, there was a storm in the outer islands, and many fishing boats were forced to return early. But it was strange to say that the storm raged outside the city of Mordor. Once it reached the island of Mordor, a terrible storm turned into a downpour, and the intensity of the storm was reduced by at least half. This meant that what Soren had prepared at the beginning had taken effect. The temples and arcane towers distributed in the city of Mordor had begun to affect and balance the weather conditions of the city. An invisible energy barrier had surrounded the island of Mordor, forming an artificial field effect. After the heavy rain, the city of Mordor was like a pearl. But when people got up early to prepare for work, there was a commotion on the other side of the street. Then the guards of the city of Mordor rushed over, and many curious people followed to watch. It didn't take long for the riot to subside. Many citizens of Mordor City who came to watch the fun saw the little girl who was walking a Quetzalcoatlus with a wingspan of 15 meters arrogantly with a rope as if she was walking a dog. Many new citizens were puzzled, they didn't know who this little girl was. Many old residents of Mordor smiled and looked at the cute little girl calmly. A huge Quetzalcoatlus walked past them. The little princess of Mordor. Her Highness Vivian. She hadn't shown up for so long, they thought Her Highness Vivian had gone somewhere. For the old residents of Mordor, they had long been used to such a scene. Since a long time ago, Vivian would go out for a walk with the former Quetzalcoatlus every day. It was just that the little princess had not shown up for so long, and she looked more beautiful, and the Quetzalcoatlus behind her was getting bigger and bigger. The guards consciously maintained order on both sides of the street. Vivian, on the other hand, was used to the curious gazes of the people. She held the gigantic Quetzalcoatlus in one hand and Lulu, who was almost as tall as her, in the other hand, and walked towards the beach happily. In order to fuse with the divinity, she hadn't gone out for a long time. Today, she came out to walk Blackie, who she raised, and took Lulu, who had just returned from a mission, out to play for a while. After all, the little girl was only 11 years old this year. No matter how mature she was, it was inevitable that she would have some childish playful thoughts. In front was Vivian, behind was Lulu, and behind them was a huge two-legged pterosaur. Many people would gradually get used to this kind of situation because young girls like to get up early and go out for a walk. As the Pearl of Mordor City, Vivian was usually very low-key, and she was only noticeable when she went out for a walk occasionally. Vivian's awakening made Soren feel like his life was back on track. Everything was looking good. If it wasn't for the threat of the Dread Lord and the God of Murder, perhaps Soren would be more than happy to enjoy his current relaxed life. When he was free, he would manage Mordor City and study the war chess plane, making Mordor City the most dazzling city in the material plane little by little. Gloria studied alchemy technology when she was free, striving to understand the core mysteries of the arcane empire as soon as possible, striving to become a witch above level 30 as soon as possible, so that she could accompany Soren for a longer time. As for Vivian, she grew up happily and enjoyed the childhood that she should have at her age. Unfortunately, now it was the time of the Avatar crisis, and everything was just imagination. Soren only relaxed for a while, and then he began to face everything again, thinking about how to help Vivian get a clergy, and how to deal with the Dread Lord and the God of Murder at the same time. The demigod vampire was a very good example. It had to be said that this opponent still gave Soren a lot of inspiration. He gained a lot of experience from the demigod vampire when he became a god. Now if Vivian wanted to become a god, the demigod vampire was also a good comparison target. The demigod vampire used his race clergy to become a god. His domain extension was very referential. If Vivian wanted to successfully integrate the clergy, she still needed to compare with the demigod vampire. Soren already knew where the Church of the Maiden of Pain was. As for the whereabouts of Lauvita herself, the gods were more cautious in this era. Unless it was someone like Soren who had a base camp, they would not easily expose their traces. But as long as they knew that the church could slowly find her, Vivian did not need to rush to become a god. In the evening, after Soren completed the study of the legendary spell, imprisonment, he began to read the information about the gods sent back by the rogues below. Recently, he paid a lot more attention to the gods. Basically, whether it was the gods of the good camp or the gods of the evil camp, Soren maintained a certain level of attention and paid attention to their movements at all times. Today, a very interesting piece of information was sent back from below. There was also an emblem in this piece of information, which was a woman's delicate lips. In the whole multiverse, there was no one who could make the emblem of a god so rippling. It seemed that there was only one so far. That was the one mentioned a long time ago, cat and dance goddess, Karis. Karis was also known as the cat and pleasure goddess. Her camp used to be chaotic and good. Later, because of the influence of Lady of Night, she tried all kinds of forbidden and taboo pleasure. As a result, she fell into chaotic and evil. Now, with the help of the goddess of love, she was restored to chaotic and neutral. She was the famous goddess who was almost broken by Lady of Night. Karis was the goddess of minor divine power. She was in charge of hedonism, sensual pleasure, large joyous celebrations, and the clergy of cats. The combat power of this goddess was relatively average, but she was a little stronger than most ordinary minor divine powers because she mastered the domains of chaos, charm, travel, and trickery. Under normal circumstances, as long as a god mastered the domain of trickery, they would not be too weak. Cherise was a radiant and beautiful goddess. Only Shuni, the goddess of love, could compare to her in terms of looks. She was a frivolous and capricious god, so very few people could really understand her true inner thoughts. Her personality was as unique and independent as a cat's, and she liked to enjoy herself. She always took care of her appearance to maintain her delicate and beautiful appearance. This was a capricious goddess. She was also one of the more famous funny goddesses among the gods because her believers also had a hobby, which was to always find various reasons to hold various kinds of celebrations that satisfied the senses. This goddess was very much like a cat. She was also a goddess who liked to wander, and was even once thought by the gods that she had wanderlust. However, because of her wanderlust, Karis directly fell into the trap of Lady of Night. She began to experience all kinds of dark pleasures and was controlled by Shar's dark power. Now, although this goddess had learned a little, her wanderlust had not changed. This was because the information in Soren's hands recorded information related to her. Her traces actually appeared in Arendelle at one time, and then there were signs that she seemed to have recently taken an airship to Port Tylon. This goddess was obviously looking for trouble again. Lady of Night had never forgotten that she had escaped from his hands, and the spies under Soren's command had found the traces of this goddess, so the other gods' churches must have found something as well. Looking at her posture, she was planning to go to the city of Moder. Soren did not have much objection to this goddess, but if this goddess of chaos encountered any trouble at that time, he did not know whether he should do it or not. For now, the goddess of cat and dance, Karis was a god under the goddess of love. Although the goddess of love was not very good at fighting, she was still a powerful god. Soren thought about it and decided to entrust the information to the goddess of love. The goddess of love, Shuni, and her gods, plus various good allies. Most of the goddesses in this series were a bit funny. The Avatar crisis had caused all of these goddesses to fall. With Soren's understanding of them, he only hoped that in the middle and late stages of the Avatar crisis in the future, fewer goddesses in this series would die. P.S. Today's update. The hemorrhoids are acting up. Don't talk, Fudu needs to be alone. Chapter 879. The late stage of the Avatar crisis. The non-combat gods in the pantheon suffered the greatest loss, especially the original hedonistic goddesses. None of them had a good ending. Soren even remembered that a goddess was imprisoned by the demon duke of the Bator Inferno. He didn't know how long it took for her to be rescued. However, that was something that happened much later on. Speaking of it now, the gods had not yet fought so fiercely. At present, everyone was still relatively restrained. Time always passed very quickly without anyone noticing. In the blink of an eye, it was almost May. At this time, some signs of the third wave of the Avatar crisis had begun to appear. Motor City was located in the outer islands, so it was not obvious. However, the traces of the devils were becoming more and more frequent on the continent, especially the low-grade devils, which began to be more and more common in the wilderness. In the first two waves, the devils were not the main force, but they also gained something. Now, these gains were transformed into little devils as cannon fodder. They began to appear frequently in the wilderness and attacked various non-devil creatures at the same time. Wind Spear Hills. River Valley. Soren's figure appeared in this somewhat remote area. This was the edge of the Wind Spear Hills. The land was not very fertile, but there were thousands of residents nearby. Behind him was the high priest with a serious face, and a few other priests above the level of bishop. Then there was the ugly monkey who returned from a mission. This incident was because of the news he brought back. My lord. A priest who looked like an archbishop bowed his head humbly to Soren, and then said in a deep voice, "The news has been sent back. Recently, there has been a batch of problematic food in the southern region. Many civilians began to get sick after eating it. All of these foods were planted with vicious spells. If the priests don't dispel it, people who have eaten the food will become undead creatures, and people who have been attacked by them will be infected with corpse poison." The devils finally took action. Compared with the reckless behavior of the devils were obviously more proficient in calculation and conspiracy. Nobody knew when it started, but a batch of problematic food appeared in the southern region. At first, no one noticed it. However, as more and more people fell ill, people finally discovered the source of the problem. What was even more serious was that these sick people eventually turned into undead, and those who were attacked by them would also be infected with corpse poison. The southern region was the most populous place in the material plane. Once such a problem occurred, it would undoubtedly spread quickly. The Wind Spear Hills were also affected. In the valley that Soren had personally come to, there was a village where everyone had been turned into zombies. There's something wrong with this land. Soren had been watching everything silently. Then he turned his head and said to the high priest, "Send people to spread out and look for them. The soil here has been polluted. There must be a secret altar nearby. Any creature that eats what is grown on this land will be infected with a terrible disease." Tell the people below not to eat anything here, including water. Soren felt a sense of familiarity when he saw this. It was similar to what the devils usually did, but it was also similar to what the liches of the Grey Waste did. The devils liked to change the structure of the polluted land. This was because many devils were immune to poison, and in the process of attacking the abyss, the most common thing they did was to change the plain laws of a piece of land they conquered, transforming the chaotic laws of the abyss into orderly laws. In the front lines of the Blood War, many fortresses occupied by the devils were eventually transformed, and the laws of the land became more suitable for the devils. In front of Soren was a piece of transformed land. A filthy power had eroded the land. Whether it was the plants, the soil, or the rivers, everything had been corroded by this power. Although it didn't seem like there were many changes, as long as the people living here ate the things here, they would slowly get sick. In the end, it was very likely that they would be infected by the undead plague and turn into undead creatures. The method is very similar to that of the devils. But why does it look like the method of the skeletal waste? Could it be that the undead kings had begun to attack the material plane? Soren couldn't help but fall into deep thought. According to the normal historical progress, the undead creatures should attack the material plane during the fifth wave of impact. At that time, many people had died in the material plane. Many of them were entrenched in the lower planes, especially the Grey Waste, the spiritual realm, and the half-planes near the underworld. They left behind the history of the liches, undead kings, and so on. They felt that this was a very important opportunity. The large number of deaths in the material plane had given them a chance to show their strength, so the fifth wave of impact of the Avatar crisis broke out. This was also what the adventurers at that time jokingly called undead calamity. However, at present, although many people had died in the material plane, the proportion was not very large. Even if the undead kings of the undead system cast spells to summon souls, it was unlikely that they could gather a terrifying army of undead from the graveyard and the wild. Judging from the signs in front of him, Soren felt that it was more like the devils had drawn in and colluded with a small number of legendary liches and undead kings. They used the power of the undead creatures to weaken the strength of the material plane, and finally achieved the goal of harvesting enough souls. However, this large-scale killing of people was more like the means of the devils, and not the careful planning of the devils. Soren was a little confused for a moment. He felt that history seemed to have a more serious deviation here. That was, the third wave of impact had caused the devils, demons, and undead to take action, but their actions were not too big. The undead plague must be controlled. Otherwise, the number of people dying will become very high. And at that time, the aura of death will become stronger and stronger. By then, even if no one casts spells in the graveyard of the material plane, many corpses that have been buried long ago will crawl out. By then, I'm afraid that the fifth wave of impact will come early. According to history, the third wave of impact was the Devil Legion, the fourth wave of impact was the violent elemental life, and the fifth wave of impact was the undead calamity. The first wave of impact had caused a large number of deaths, so when the fifth wave of impact came, even the gods could not sit still anymore. During that time, it could be said that there were undead everywhere. The people who had died in the past all crawled up one by one because of their resentment, and the entire material plane was shrouded in the aura of death. Soren did not know whether it was a good thing for the undead kings to take action early, but the elemental turmoil had not yet broken out. Since he could react quickly, the god of light, the lady of silver moon, the goddess of agriculture, and the other gods should be able to react quickly, right? Soren thought for a long time. In the end, he decided that no matter how the future developed, the problem at hand must be solved first. He must first find the contaminated altar, and then find a way to purify this filthy land. No matter what, the undead wreaking havoc was more troublesome than the devils and demons. Chapter 880. Most of the devils were immune to poison. Therefore, they would first use some underhanded schemes to earn more chips for themselves. Compared to the high and mighty gods, the ordinary archdevils were still slightly weaker. Of course, the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus, was an exception. But if the other archdevils came to the material plane, their strength would at most be similar to that of a fallen saint. In short, if any archdevil dared to come to the material plane, Soren would have the ability to fight them head-on. With Soren's guidance, the church's rogues immediately scattered. Soren also nodded slightly to the high priest next to him, indicating that she should also go and see the situation. Those who had the ability to cast a magic circle to pollute the earth were basically senior devils, which meant that their strength was above the legendary level. They were at least elite bone devils, and there was even the possibility of higher-level devils appearing. To deal with such an enemy, the high priest was still needed. The rogues soon found something. Because they found some dead animals. These animals were poisoned to death, and some of their bodies had begun to rot. Over here. A priest's exclamation came from somewhere, followed by the sound of a battle. The others heard the sound and rushed over, and Soren also frowned slightly and flew over. The devils used such a large-scale killing method. Their purpose was not only to deal with mortals and harvest souls. Soren always felt that they were targeting the gods. Because once mortals were poisoned, they had to rely on the priest's divine spells to dispel and heal. Currently, during the Avatar crisis, the gods could only give a limited amount of divine spells to the priests. In the case of limited divine spells, it was more difficult to suppress the spread of this disaster. And if it couldn't be controlled, the number of mortals dying would increase, and the channels for the gods to obtain faith would become less and less. In the end, it would become an endless cycle. If a large number of mortal believers died, then the gods would obtain less faith, and the situation would become more and more unfavorable for them. The devils and the evil gods were not on the same side. They only obeyed the orders of the Lord of Hell, Asmodeus, and only remained in awe of the other evil gods. The devil's actions this time must have something to do with the Lord of Hell. By the time Soren arrived, the battle had already ended. An intermediate chained devil, an intermediate bone devil, and a group of lesser devils had all been killed by the priests. In front of them was a huge altar that was shrouded in a foul and poisonous aura. This was the aura of the Bator Inferno. When the Bator Inferno was first created, it was filled with poison, fire, and torture. It was a plane that was first created to punish evil. The altar was polluting the land nearby, and if this continued, the water source would also start to affect more places. Destroy this place, Soren ordered with a frown. Hearing his order, the other rogues and priests immediately began to work, and in a short while, the altar was destroyed. At the same time, following the destruction of the altar, the corrosive energy gradually weakened. Now, all that was left was to purify the ground. Who dares to destroy the Lord's plan? Just as the altar was about to be completely destroyed, a roar filled with pressure rang out. Then, a raging fire ignited under the altar, and a 3-meter-tall greater devil appeared in the fire. This devil held a heavy greatsword in his hand, and his broad bat wings made him look like a devil. Many of his features were very similar to that of a greater devil, but the aura he emitted was that of a greater devil. Greater teleportation. To be able to teleport to a material plane so easily, his strength must be at least at the legendary level. Without a doubt. This was a devil on the same level as the Baler, one of the Bator Infernos, Abyss Fiend. The Abyss Fiend was one of the top fighting forces in Barthas. It looked very similar to the Baler, but it had the characteristics of a devil, and its strength was slightly weaker than the Baler. Of course, this was in the case of a one-on-one battle. If it was any other battle, then the Abyss Fiend would have a much higher chance of winning. The Abyss Fiend's strength was at least 35 points, and their challenge level was at least 21. If a normal person were to encounter them, then without a legendary party, they wouldn't have much of a chance of winning. This was because devils were more cunning than demons. The Abyss Fiend was proficient in all kinds of teleportation techniques, and could cast a blasphemous whisper with a spell power of 25 or above. In theory, an Abyss Fiend had the ability to destroy a small city on its own. The pressure of a legendary demon enveloped everything around it. The pit fiend came out of the fire aggressively and glanced at the priests and rogues in front of it with contempt. However, when its gaze fell on Sauron and the high priest who were standing at the back, the pit fiend's eyes were filled with disdain. The abyss fiend, who had just appeared in an incomparably cool manner, immediately activated a greater teleportation spell without saying anything. It didn't even want to say goodbye, and it was ready to flee. Trying to run after showing off? No way. Sauron looked at the abyss fiend in front of him expressionlessly as he cast a greater teleportation spell. However, when the teleportation spell was about to be completed, the abyss fiend's face showed a look of relief. Sauron silently waved his hand. Change space, power of divinity. The teleportation spell that was about to be completed disappeared instantly, and the abyss fiend's face froze at that moment. Then he turned around stiffly, and without saying a word, his huge body directly knelt in front of Sauron, and said with a trembling voice, "Great Shadow Lord. Protector of the half-elves. Ruler of Mordor. Supreme Sauron. Lowly Floss didn't mean to offend your majesty. It's just..." The abyss fiend, who called himself Floss, hesitated for a moment. After weighing whether his life or the mission was more important, he directly said, "Lowly Floss is just loyally carrying out the orders from the top of hell. I don't have any intention to offend the great Sauron." This guy knelt down quite straightforwardly. Sauron's expression finally changed a little, and the others present were a little stunned. It seemed that they couldn't react in time. At first, he appeared in an incomparably cool manner, but after seeing Sauron, he immediately turned 360 degrees and knelt on the spot. The abyss fiend's performance was too dramatic. Everyone present didn't know whether to laugh or cry after they reacted. However, they couldn't help but praise this guy in their hearts for being able to adapt to the circumstances. Obviously, he had done his homework before taking action, otherwise, he wouldn't have recognized Sauron at a glance. And he knelt down so decisively. P.S. From today onwards, the public account will update some of the greater gods' information. You can follow it and have a look. Chapter 881. In the dream, Futu had become an incomparably awesome exorcist. Furthermore, he had gone to England to deal with all kinds of vampires and female canines. The whole process was extremely satisfying. He had been pretending to be cool the whole time. It had been a long time since I had such a good dream. After waking up, I had a look of longing for more. Just as the dream was about to end, after a big battle with a group of vampires, a white-bearded priest told me, "Futu, you have worked hard. You should have a good rest." When I thought about it, it really made sense. In the dream, Futu had fought with many vampires for 300 rounds. He was indeed exhausted. Therefore, it was reasonable for me to rest today. As a result, it just so happened that every month, there were more than 30 days that I did not want to write. Therefore, it was reasonable for me to ask for leave today. Today, not only did I have to ask for leave, Futu also asked for monthly votes. By the way, I gave myself a thumbs up for being so shameless. You're tuning in to the Dreamy Love Stories YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.